Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling something that is, frankly, one of the most stigmatized, complex, and deeply misunderstood conditions in psychology, the schizophrenia spectrum. We are going to bypass the myths and look strictly at the clinical realities derived from our source material. So, if you're ready to break down a heavy subject and demystify how this disorder actually works, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's look at our roadmap. First, understanding the baseline of the schizophrenia spectrum. Second, positive symptoms, which are pathological excesses. Third, negative symptoms, or pathological deficits. And finally, psychomotor symptoms and catatonia. Having this structure is really going to help us grasp the full picture.
Section 1. Understanding the schizophrenia spectrum, the baseline.
So, what are we actually dealing with here? Schizophrenia is essentially a debilitating group of psychotic disorders. It's a condition where a person's personal, social, and occupational functioning really starts to deteriorate. And this happens because of profoundly disturbed thoughts, strange perceptions, unusual emotions, and even motor abnormalities. It's absolutely crucial we understand the sheer weight of this. It fundamentally alters reality for the person experiencing it, creating a tremendous burden, not just for the patients who are trapped in a really terrifying state, but for their families and our society as a whole.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the clinical terminology we use. When we say positive or negative symptoms, we are not talking about good and bad. Think of it more like basic math. Positive symptoms are pathological excesses, literally bizarre additions to a person's baseline behavior, like adding hallucinations or delusions. Negative symptoms, on the flip side, are pathological deficits. That's a subtraction of normal behaviors, like losing the ability to express emotion or a severe poverty of speech.
Section 2. Positive symptoms. Pathological excesses.
So, as we just mentioned, positive symptoms are the additions. Things like delusions, disorganized thinking, hallucinations, and inappropriate affect. These are active distortions of reality. We're talking about a mind that is literally creating things that aren't there. It completely floods the individual with excess sensory and cognitive inputs that they just cannot control. It's a massive, overwhelming addition to their conscious experience.
Let's test your intuition for a second with the scenario straight from the clinical text. Imagine a person genuinely believes their actions are being controlled by a satellite chip implanted in their brain by extraterrestrials. What kind of delusion is this? How would clinicians actually categorize this specific false belief? Take a guess.
If you guessed a delusion of control, you hit the nail on the head. This is the false belief that your feelings, thoughts, and actions are being dictated by someone or something else. So the crucial point to remember here is that a delusion is a false belief that is firmly held on totally inadequate grounds. It is completely unaffected by rational argument. You can't just talk someone out of it. And there are plenty of other types, right? People might suffer from delusions of persecution, thinking they're being spied on, or delusions of reference, where they attach intensely personal meaning to the completely random actions of a stranger on the street, or even delusions of grandeur, where they believe they have special, extraordinary powers.
And this chaotic excess, it totally bleeds into the way a person communicates, creating what we call formal thought disorders. Imagine trying to follow a conversation where the person is just rapidly shifting from one completely unrelated topic to another. That's known as loosening of associations or derailment. Or they might invent entirely new words that only mean something to them. Those are called neologisms. They might even just repeat the same thoughts over and over inappropriately, which is perseveration. You can see how these disorders deeply muddle the normal structure of thinking. It makes logical, day-to-day communication incredibly difficult.
Then, of course, we have the sensory overload of hallucinations. These are perceptions that happen in the absolute absence of external stimuli, and they can affect any sense. You can have tactile hallucinations, like a burning or tingling sensation. Somatic ones, which is feeling something happening inside your body, like a snake crawling in your stomach. Visual, gustatory, or even olfactory hallucinations, like suddenly smelling poison. But in schizophrenia, auditory hallucinations are by far the most common. Patients literally hear voices speaking directly to them, which is a second-person hallucination, or talking to each other about the patient, a third-person hallucination. Throw in inappropriate affect, which is displaying emotions completely unsuited to a situation, like laughing at a funeral, and you really start to see the full, overwhelming scale of these positive symptoms.
Section 3. Negative symptoms. Pathological deficits.
Now we transition to negative symptoms. These are the pathological deficits that subtract from normal behavior. They're characterized by a severe loss of typical emotional and behavioral responses.
And honestly, it is truly heartbreaking because you're witnessing this profound deficit of human expression. The active chaos of the positive symptoms might subside, but what's left behind is this deep, profound void.
Let's look at the core negative symptoms. First up is alogia, or poverty of speech, which is exactly what it sounds like, a severe reduction in speech and speech content. Then there's blunted affect, where a person shows far less sadness, joy, or anger than most people normally would. If there's absolutely zero emotion at all, we call that flat affect. We also see avolition, which is this incredibly deep apathy, a total inability to start or complete any course of action. And finally, social withdrawal. When you combine conditions like avolition and alogia, they essentially trap the individual in their own isolated world. They withdraw socially and become totally focused on their own internal ideas and fantasies.
Section 4. Psychomotor symptoms and catatonia.
So psychomotor symptoms involve moving less spontaneously or perhaps making odd, repetitive grimaces and gestures. And this brilliantly illustrates something absolutely crucial. Psychological distress isn't just confined to our thoughts or our speech. It directly translates into highly unusual, observable physical movements. The physical body literally begins to mirror the profound disruption happening inside the brain.
And these psychomotor symptoms can escalate into extreme forms, collectively known as catatonia. The physical toll of this is just immense. It might start as a catatonic stupor, where the person remains completely motionless and silent for long stretches of time. It can escalate into catatonic rigidity, where the patient maintains a stiff, upright posture for hours on end and actually resists efforts to be moved. Or it can present as catatonic posturing, where they hold these awkward, bizarre positions for incredibly long periods. It's essentially a profound paralysis of normal bodily autonomy.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Considering the severe, debilitating loss of thought, emotion, and physical movement, how can society better address the tremendous social and psychological costs of the schizophrenia spectrum? We started out by talking about the baseline reality of this disorder, and really, this is where we have to return. Understanding the strict clinical mechanics of positive, negative, and psychomotor symptoms, that is just step one. The real challenge is using this knowledge to build profound empathy and champion highly informed mental health awareness in our own communities. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep analyzing the facts, and as always, keep asking the big questions.